In the early 14th century, the political map of Europe was dominated by powerful dynasties, long-standing feudal ties, and a growing sense of national identity. At the center of it all stood France, one of the largest and most populous kingdoms in Europe, ruled for generations by the mighty Capetian dynasty. But in 1328, that unbroken royal lineage came to an end. King Charles IV of France died without a surviving male heir. This wasn't just the end of a king, it was the collapse of a royal house that had ruled France continuously for over 300 years. The throne stood empty, and the question of succession ignited a fierce political and legal debate that would ultimately reshape Europe. One of the most prominent claimants to the French crown was Edward III of England. At just 15 years old when Charles IV died, Edward already ruled a powerful kingdom across the Channel. But more importantly, Edward was the grandson of Philip IV of France, through his mother Isabella of France, Charles IV's own sister. Through her, Edward argued he had a legitimate claim to the French crown. The French barons feared the idea of an English monarch sitting on the French throne, a threat to their independence and national security. Instead, the crown was offered to Philip of Valois, a cousin of the late king and a male-line grandson of Philip III of France. He was French, politically experienced and well-connected among the nobility. In May 1328, Philip was crowned Philip VI of France, becoming the first king of the new House of Valois. What seemed like a smooth succession would soon unravel into one of the longest and most brutal wars in European history, the 100 Years' War. Philip VI was born in 1293 into one of the most prominent noble families in France. His father was Charles of Valois, the younger brother of King Philip IV, and a man with his own royal ambitions. Charles of Valois had hoped to claim thrones abroad, including those of Aragon and Constantinople, but his efforts were ultimately unsuccessful. Nevertheless, he maintained high status within the French court, and his marriage to Margaret of Anjou, Philip's mother, brought additional prestige and alliances. Young Philip grew up in a world shaped by royal politics, courtly traditions, and military service. As a member of the extended Capetian family, he was well educated and trained in the duties expected of a high nobleman. Unlike the sons of reigning kings, Philip did not grow up expecting to rule France. He was not directly in line for the throne, and his early life was spent managing family lands and building his reputation as a capable noble. He held the titles of Count of Anjou, Maine, and Valois, and steadily gained influence through both marriage alliances and military leadership. Throughout the early 14th century, Philip served under his Capetian cousins, notably King Charles IV, and distinguished himself in campaigns in Flanders and in maintaining order across northern France. He developed a reputation for prudence, loyalty, and competence, qualities that made him a trusted figure among the French nobility. Everything changed in 1328, when Charles IV died without a male heir. His death marked the third consecutive Capetian king to die without a surviving son, following the untimely deaths of Louis X and Philip V. During the brief regency that followed Charles IV's death, the nobility had to decide who would inherit the crown. The young Edward III of England, as the son of Charles's sister Isabella, was the closest blood descendant. To resolve the crisis, the Estates General, a council of nobles, clergy, and townsmen, invoked Salic law, an old Frankish legal tradition that excluded women and their descendants from the royal succession. It was a political decision wrapped in legal language, designed to protect French sovereignty and the authority of the native nobility. With Edward's claim rejected, the crown passed to Philip of Valois, Charles IV's cousin through the male line. On May 29, 1328, in the Cathedral of Reims, Philip was crowned King of France, taking the title Philip VI. Philip VI's reign began with confidence. His coronation had the full backing of the French nobility, and one of his first major acts as king was to assert control over the rebellious region of Flanders. That same year, a major uprising had broken out among the Flemish townsmen who opposed French influence and feudal obligations. Philip responded with a swift military campaign and crushed the rebels at the Battle of Cassel in August 1328. This victory was significant. It strengthened his image as a capable and decisive ruler. For a moment, the French crown appeared stable under the new Valois dynasty. Meanwhile, relations with England remained formally cordial, but uneasy. In 1329, Edward III of England travelled to France and performed homage to Philip VI at Amiens for his Duchy of Gascony in southwestern France. But the act was politically sensitive. Edward did not renounce his claim to the French crown, and tensions lingered beneath the surface. The situation grew more complex in the early 1330s. Philip VI began strengthening his alliances in Scotland, supporting David II, the son of Robert the Bruce, against English interference. In return, Edward III backed the pro-English faction in the Low Countries and expanded his influence there through trade and diplomacy. The rivalry took a sharper turn in 1337 when Philip made a critical move. He formally confiscated the Duchy of Aquitaine, also known as Gascony, from Edward. Edward responded with a bold counterstroke. In October 1337, he declared himself the rightful king of France, reviving his earlier claim based on his descent from Philip IV through his mother. With this declaration, the long-standing rivalry turned into open conflict. This marked the beginning of what would become the 100 Years' War. Edward III began launching raids along the northern coast of France, supporting rebellious Flemish towns and forging alliances with continental powers hostile to the French crown. Philip VI faced increasing pressure both from within France and across the Channel. He tried to counter these moves diplomatically and militarily, but his resources were stretched thin. In 1340, the war turned sharply against France in a dramatic naval clash, the Battle of Sluys. Edward led a powerful English fleet into the port of Sluys in Flanders, where the French navy was anchored. In a decisive engagement, the English destroyed most of the French ships. The loss crippled France's ability to control the English Channel and gave Edward a critical advantage. He could now bring armies into France without fear of naval interception. Philip attempted to reorganize and prepare for a larger conflict, but he faced challenges from his own nobles. Many were reluctant to provide troops or taxes without conditions, and local interests often came before national defense. In 1346, Edward launched a full-scale invasion of northern France. His army landed in Normandy, marched east through French territory, and pillaged towns along the way. Philip responded by gathering a massive army to confront him. The two forces met near the village of Crécy in late August. The Battle of Crécy would become one of the most famous battles of the Middle Ages. The French army outnumbered the English, but it was disorganized and poorly coordinated. Philip's cavalry launched repeated frontal assaults against the English position, where Edward had stationed thousands of longbowmen on high ground. The English archers, using powerful longbows with armor-piercing arrows, tore through the advancing French ranks. Despite his personal bravery, Philip was unable to turn the tide. Wounded and surrounded by chaos, he was forced to withdraw from the field. It was a humiliating and costly defeat. The loss at Crécy had lasting consequences. It shattered the myth of French military superiority and exposed the weaknesses of the feudal levy system. Meanwhile, Edward marched on and laid siege to the important northern city of Calais, which fell to the English in 1347 after nearly a year. Calais would remain in English hands for over 2 centuries, becoming a vital stronghold on the continent. As Philip reeled from military setbacks, another disaster descended upon France, one not caused by kings or soldiers, but by nature. In 1348, the Black Death reached France. The plague spread rapidly through towns and villages, killing tens of thousands in a matter of months. The French economy collapsed under the weight of labor shortages, trade disruption, and widespread panic. The government's ability to collect taxes and raise armies was crippled. The king attempted to maintain order and offer guidance during the pandemic, but there was little he could do. The scale of death and despair overwhelmed the entire country. Nobles, clergy, peasants, none were immune. By some estimates, 1/3 to 1/2 of France's population perished during the epidemic. By the end of the 1340s, Philip VI was a king worn down by the weight of continuous crisis. The defeats at Sluys and Crécy, the catastrophic fall of Calais, and the devastating effects of the Black Death had deeply shaken the kingdom. His authority, once rooted in military strength and noble support, had been badly undermined. The French monarchy, newly re-established under the House of Valois, was already under strain. Philip had to manage succession concerns. His heir, John, known as John of Normandy, had been given increasing responsibility in royal affairs. In the final year of his life, Philip moved between royal residences and continued to issue royal orders, but his health was failing. On August 22, 1350, Philip VI died at the age of 57 at Nogent-le-Roi, west of Paris. He was succeeded by his son, who became King John II of France, known as John the Good. Philip VI's reign had begun with legitimacy, strength, and optimism. But in less than 25 years, his kingdom had been plunged into a ruinous war, suffered some of the worst military defeats in French history, and endured the deadliest pandemic Europe had ever known. Though not a weak ruler in character, Philip often struggled to adapt to the scale of the challenges he faced. Yet, despite the failures of his reign, Philip VI laid the foundations of a dynasty that would continue to rule France for over 200 years. The House of Valois, born in crisis, would ultimately guide France through the rest of the 100 Years' War, internal rebellions, and eventual national recovery.